2, 1. Hey everybody, it's your friend Adam. I'm here for the very first Think Club debates. This channel was demonetized on Christmas Eve of all the time. So I haven't been uploading daily content here for a while, but I wanted to do something with the channel. I've had some back and forth with YouTube. I'm trying to get the channel remonetized. So you guys won't be able to super chat. I have the chat open. We're going to focus on a discussion, and this is kind of a learning on the job, a develop it as it goes type situation. I like a lot of these debate channels. I listen to a lot of debates, and I would like to debate more, but I figured I have a platform. I might as well just do it myself. So I'm here with Nicholas. How do you pronounce your last name, Nicholas?
Suter, same as the judge.
So Nicholas Suter and I had a conversation. You had done a debate with S.J. Thomason, and I had made a response video to that debate, and we were going to kind of expand upon your debate topic there. I think the debate topic that you originally had was, do we still need religion? And I think in my response video, I gave you kind of a hard time because you took a strong position on the fact that we never needed religion. So does that match up with your recollection of our discussion?
Close enough.
Okay. So I changed the debate topic to, do we need religion at all? We can just dispense with the still need religion part of it.
Okay.
And I figured we would just introduce our arguments. Like I'll take a few minutes to introduce my argument. You can take a few minutes to introduce your counter argument, and then we'll just kind of have a free flowing discussion from there. So I'm trying to do kind of a hybrid of a formal debate and an informal discussion. So I think it's important to get the arguments out there. I also think it's important to, I don't know if you're familiar with this concept of steel manning, where you...
Oh, yes.
So I want to steel man your argument, you want to steel man my argument. And I think we did some of that privately, if I'm remembering correctly, didn't we?
We did, and I found you to be really quite reasonable, and I very much enjoyed it, and I thought we agreed on a lot of things. So I'm confident that your goals are quite reasonable and achievable.
So one of the things that has bothered me is there's all these scientific books coming out about the evolutionary origins of religion. Now, a lot of atheists, like I got into the atheist debates because there was a contention between creationists and atheists over the topic of evolution. I am an evolutionist. I believe in evolution. I think Dawkins made a argument that religion is unnecessary. Obviously, he famously wrote the book, The God Delusion. So I am in agreement with Dawkins in that I don't believe in religion. I myself am an atheist, but I still think that there is an evolutionary utility to religion. Now, Dawkins has come out and said he doesn't think that. He thinks that he uses the metaphor of a moth, and he's making an argument that religion may have evolved some utility in the past, but in the modern era, we don't know if that utility still exists. In fact, he even goes as far as saying that the utility may be completely gone and it may be a detriment, which I am open to that argument, but like citation needed. I really want to see.
Yeah.
I really want.
You can't just drop that.
Yeah. I really want to see his evidence on that. So I recently read the book, Do We Need Religion? The author, hold on, let me get the author here. It's Stephen T. Asma. And I hadn't known this guy's stuff until I read the book. It's Oxford University Press. It came out in 2018. And he makes a lot of the arguments that I have been kind of making in the debates and on YouTube, but he actually goes and applies the scientific studies to them. So that is basically the argument that I want to make here. There's two things that I think we can focus on just for simplicity, but I wrote down all of the arguments that he makes in the book. He makes an argument that that we use religion as an emotional management system to deal with sorrow and death, which is a very compelling argument. And I think it's an argument that I made to you privately. I said something to the effect of, I don't know how you can call yourself a progressive if your philosophy is denigrating those who are in the most need, those that are
Oh,
suffering
geez,
from
yeah.
the loss of loved ones. And like I often tell the atheists, if you want to go down and proselytize atheism, try it at the hospital. Like that's where it is the most difficult to do. Like it's very easy to go to the college campus and say, God doesn't exist, we don't need it. I'm along for the ride. We're having fun. But as soon as you show up at the hospital and start saying that stuff, you realize that you're doing real damage. And one of the arguments that I'm making, and I want to make here in this debate too, is I think people like Matt Dillahunty, I think his ethical framework has a contradiction, a huge contradiction, because he is saying that the highest value is truth, and at the same time the highest value is well-being. And where those two come into conflict, that conflict needs to be resolved. And where they come into conflict specifically is in this emotional management with sorrow and death, because you're talking about someone's well-being coming at a cost if they are not allowed this magical thinking that they will one day be reunited with their loved ones. So that's one of the arguments that he makes in the book that I think is the most powerful. He also makes an argument that I'm constantly making about forgiveness being a restart button that helps facilitate social cohesion. There's been a number of books on that. He makes the argument that religion adds value to society in mental training. It helps us in our mental training by giving us examples and templates for life and situations that we don't necessarily have secular replacements for. And I'm open to the idea that we could have secular replacements for this stuff. This is the debate to have, not the debate whether or not.
Yeah.
So the fourth one, there's just 5 here. The fourth one is ecstasy, joy, and play. He says that religion adds utility to society in those fields and also helping people deal with fear and rage. So I'm not going to touch on, I'm not going to touch on the mental training, the ecstasy, the fear and rage, the last 3, but I want to focus specifically on the first one and maybe the second one if we have time to get to. But a major part of my argument, and he makes this brilliantly in the very beginning of the book, because he himself has been an atheist his entire life. He's a professor, he's a philosopher. He was very much involved with the Michael Shermer, Richard Dawkins, like Sam Harris tribe. Okay, so he's not a believer at all, but he tells this story about how he was he was teaching a class that seemed somewhat sanctimonious about how religion is just a myth and all of that. And a student came up to him after the class and told him this heart-wrenching story about how his brother was brutally murdered. And it nearly drove his mother insane to the point where she was not taking care of them. And he feels himself and his sister may have actually been wards of the state and his mother institutionalized if it wasn't for the fact that she had embraced religion and this idea that her son who was murdered would be made whole again and they would reunite in the afterlife. And this is what got her through this time, the evolutionary argument is there. Like if you lose a child and you end up losing all 3 of your children over that's not an evolutionary net positive, right? The evolutionary net positive would be to embrace this magical thinking. Now, I think a debate over whether or not there is a secular replacement for religion is an interesting debate, and one that the atheists, anti-theists need to have. But this is where I come up. This is where I find the greatest difficulty, because what is the secular replacement for that woman? What is the secular replacement for that woman? So that is basically my argument. I'll let you have the floor for your counter argument or your thoughts, and we'll go from there.
All right, wonderful. Yeah, and perhaps some of my background may be helpful. I will say, just to sort of go backwards for a second and start with that last example, I think there probably are secular replacements. I wouldn't necessarily think of it as a replacement, but the question of whether there are or are not is almost secondary, because the question is twofold. One, are there secular replacements? And two, are they available right now? And at a minimum, the answer to the second one appears to be no.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
if there is a secular replacement, was that available to her right then and there? If the answer to that is no, then it would seem to me that religion had immediate utility for her then and there. And to sort of start where, because I think I would want to make sure that we don't conflate utility and need. Um, and that may be a point of contention, that may not. It sounds like when you were starting, you were talking about Dawkins and him talking about a need of religion, and then it slipped into him talking about, well, gee, religion doesn't have utility. With SJ, the interesting thing was the debate topic originally was on the utility of religion, and we were supposed to have that on non sequitur, but it ended up getting delayed. So we decided to go do another debate on a different show, and I kind of insisted on a different topic because I didn't want to just take that away from non sequitur. We were waiting on them, and I didn't want to just toss the debate to another channel. So we went on another one and went from does it have utility to do you need it? But that is a different question. Not do you need it, but is it sort of needed by us? So my thinking on this is I am an anti-theist, but it's funny, I use that term a bit more actually in the way, and people don't believe me on this, but the way that Hitchens used it. He was actually reasonably okay with deism, with the belief in a higher power, and even with the belief maybe that you had a personal relationship with that higher power. There's a great segment from him where he's talking, and you can look it up. It was a debate between him and Al Sharpton, where somebody says, why go against religion? And he says, look, if religion is people's favorite toy, they're going to play with it. They can play with it all they like. I really don't mind if you want to go play with it. If you want to go take your friends and play with this toy and play with your toys and talk about them with all your friends, go ahead and do that. You're not to make me play with the toys, and you're not to make my children play with the toys. And he actually emphasized more than once that was really his fundamental objection. And that's my objection as well. And I think a lot of anti-theists if you look up theism in the dictionary, you'll actually find there are two definitions. The first is any kind of religion or belief in a higher power. The second is specifically a belief in a higher power that has commandments and injunctions and that speaks with you and is opposed to deism. And it can be used either way. A lot of people use it the first way. That's actually the way it's usually used in philosophy. As a philosopher, you'd think that's the way I use it. No, I use it the second way. I have no objection to people who have beliefs that are in a higher power that can't be rationalized, that can't be, listen, if it makes you feel good and if it's helpful to you, I think that's great. And on the Codex, when we do talk about deconversion, we actually have sort of deconversion, resources on, because I think it's hard if you do lose your religion. I'm not out to obliterate people's beliefs. And I'm not out to say that religion doesn't have utility, but theistic religion has really three things that are sort of necessary to make it theistic belief. The first is that it is a belief in a higher power of some kind. I've got no objection to that. Anyone can go ahead and do that, and I understand why I miss my belief. I used to be a theist, and I miss it. So I'm not going to begrudge anybody who's got that. The second is that, and this is where deism separates from theism. The second is the belief that higher power has specific commandments and injunctions to you and with you, and has a personal relationship with you. For me, that gets a little, okay. But again, if you want to do that, that's really you. The third is what I have a problem with, and that's that this higher power empowers you to tell other people how to live, empowers you to say that homosexuality is wrong, empowers you to say that you can't get a divorce, empowers you to say, whatever it is, and to start to legislate these rules for other people. Now, there are degrees of how theistic on by that measure a religion is. Judaism for me falls sort of really on the low end. I think, especially in Israel, you can have some significant problems with lack of freedom, especially for women. Yes, they serve in the military, but they're not treated equally. And but in Judaism in particular, they really believe that Judaism only applies to to Jews. So in my mind, that makes it sort of one of the least offensive theistic religions, and one I don't have a huge number of gripes with. Pantheism, polytheism. Again, every polytheist I've ever met, really, if you want to talk to them about their beliefs, they're happy to do it, but they're not going to push them on you, and they're not going to sit there and say, Odin has this in mind for you. And it's really a much more sort of welcoming and ingracious. I've got absolutely no problem with any of that. So as an anti-theist, what I object to is that third thing, which is where we are going to use our beliefs, which we cannot rationally justify in any meaningful sense, and are based on these a number of mystical intuitions, which we've demonstrated is completely unreliable, and we're going to use that to justify how we build a society, how we build laws, and how we operate going forward. And I think that's phenomenally dangerous, and I utterly oppose it. But I don't oppose all religion. I don't oppose all religious beliefs, and I don't oppose all things irrational. Everybody's irrational. I've got no problem. And I tell atheists too. The atheist who says I have no faith, that's really not true. And when you take a look at how knowledge is formed, you're going to have some. But and I think it's unreasonable, and it's unreasonable. So I don't go around being an anti-theist to everybody I meet. If I meet somebody who believes in God, I don't sit there and say, well, gee, why? I don't challenge them. If they want to engage me with it, I'll engage back, and I try to do kid gloves unless I need to go any higher. But I don't. There's no point to that, and there's no good that comes from that. And one of the first stories I remember, one of the first people I ever started really engaging, he sent me a 4-page missive on how, because I didn't believe, my children were going to go to hell. And he described their flesh burning, the smell. He really took his time with this. It was a very long missive on all the things that were going to happen because I didn't believe. And that gets into one of my objections. But, I was freely engaging with the guy, so he's free to do that. But towards the end of our discussions, he sent me a DM and he said, listen, we need to stop these discussions. And I said, why? He said, well, I've been abandoned by everybody I know. I have no family. The female sex won't talk to me. All I've got is this. And if it's not, he said, you're really starting to make me question my belief. And the only reason I don't put a gun to my head is because you can't do it. It's prohibited in Christianity. Well, you stop the engagement, and you don't sit there and try to say, well, can I find an alternative? I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a doctor. I'm not prepared to deal with that kind of thing. You stop the engagement. And that's when I realized too, you're playing with live rounds when you do this, and you're going to make mistakes and you're going to screw people up, but you have to realize these are people with needs too. And it's not my place to sit there and say what beliefs people can or can't hold. What is my place is to say when they can start imposing those beliefs on others, and that's where I operate sort of full throttle. So I say, yeah, I am a very vocal anti-theist, but it's specifically to that third element of theism and that definition and that brand of theism. I've got no objection to deism, Buddhism. I've got no objection to pantheism, polytheism, or any theism where they keep it, they keep the injunctions at least to themselves. And I don't mind people who want to talk about it. And I don't mind if they want to talk about it publicly. I mind when they start saying this is what God says you should do. That's my objection. So I don't know. I don't think I dealt necessarily with too many of. I will say this. I don't know much about what Matt Dillahunty. I've seen the show a few times, and I know him reasonably well. Atheists talk about valuing truth above all else, and I am largely in that camp. I will say, why do I value truth? Well, I value truth because I think it's the best way to achieve good goals, a good outcome. So you could also say, I value a good outcome as well. And a good outcome is, in my mind, utilitarian. And it's where you have a sort of a net positive for the greatest number of people. And there are times when that is letting things slide. And I don't want all my beliefs challenged. I don't have time to have all my beliefs challenged by everybody I meet. And I don't think I should be challenging everybody's beliefs all the time I meet. You pick and choose your battles. And I think religion, I'd like to see religion gone to some extent, but only insofar as its influence over the public sphere. I really don't think it's helpful. I think there are some cases it helps. I think in more cases it hurts. But nonetheless, you can't sit there and say that it doesn't help in some cases. And I think if you're going to sit there and say, why does Sweden, Scandinavia, some of these countries, they have very little religion and they're very, very successful. I think there's a bit of a correlation to that. But if you're very successful, you also have sort of a less of a need for it. And that makes sense to me. And you can't say, I would not snap my fingers, do a Thanos snap and take away religion from people who are poor and have absolutely nothing else. What on earth is the point of that? You're causing suffering, and they're not imposing their religion on it. They're not causing. I want to stop the religion that's imposing on other people and causing a net negative. That's what I'm against. Everything else, I'm okay with. I do think there are people who lose their religion do tend to be depressed. They tend to have some negative consequences from that. People who were born, however, in a society without religion and raised in that don't suffer any of those consequences. So I think there is a very good argument to be made for why, if we didn't have religion, would be functioning probably a lot better. And the consequences that we see of people losing it comes from sort of cultural issues. But again, you can't just, okay, that's great to know, but that doesn't mean you can, just sit there and snap your fingers and take away everybody's religion or question it. It's not productive. My goal is what's best for, moving society forward, and that's removing religious influence from it as much as possible. But that's about it.
So I have a couple of questions for you. My definition of anti-theist, and it seems like you fit, is someone who believes the world would be a better place without religion. And the reason they believe this is because they believe religion does more harm than good, which is both things that I think you stated in your statement there, correct?
With theistic religion, and again, I'm using theistic in the second sense, which is to say theistic, that there is a God who empowers you
Right.
to tell others how to live. I have absolutely no objection to any deistic religions. I have no objection to a belief in a higher power.
Let's set those
Yeah.
aside for now, because
Okay.
I think the theistic religions are obviously the most prominent, right? I mean, Christianity and Islam are both in the billions. So they are the religions, right?
Well, there's a number of pantheists. There's Buddhists.
Yeah, but in your estimation, you're saying the world would be a better place without religion. We need to get rid of these religions, and in those religions, you're including the largest religions, right?
Yes.
So therefore, you're saying we need to get rid of 95% of religion. If you're saying we need to get rid of Christianity and Islam.
Well, we need to get rid of their influence. I don't mind if they hold it, and it may be that you can't get rid of their influence without getting rid of them. I hope that's not the case. These religions have already evolved, and they're already, the extremist Muslims are obviously having serious issues, but Christianity used to be much more violent and used to be a lot less tolerant. As it becomes more tolerant, and as it tries to exert its influence over other people less, I am more tolerant of Christianity. I would not mind Christianity at all, Christians at all, or anything like that, if they did not believe they did not believe that their God empowered and in fact commanded them to exert their Christianity on others. That's my objection to it. If you can get rid of that element and keep Christianity, I am all for keeping Christianity. I got no problem with it. If you can't, and it maybe I suspect you can. That's what we see. We've seen Christianity sort of, chill out in that respect. But that's what I'm against. And if that means getting rid of Christianity, that's what it means. I hope it doesn't mean that. I don't think it has to. But that is what I'm opposed to.
But when you say that religion does more harm than good, you are making a claim. And I'm just curious what your evidence for that claim is, because like I said, I'm reading a lot of these texts that are making quite the opposite claim and adding quite a bit of evidence to that. So,
well, I would argue that Historically, anything, let's take Christianity because that's the easiest one to go with.
Mhm.
Uh, Anything that has opposed Christian doctrine has been fought off, often violently. This includes uh, the development of the scientific method. This includes the development of rational systems for understanding our world when that understanding conflicted with how people interpreted the Bible, not necessarily what the Bible says, but what at least was thought at the time that
So
it
so
says.
just this. So your evidence is the historical record, because I mean Isaac Newton was a theist, Mendel was
Yes,
a
it was.
theist, Copernicus was a theist. So I mean there are plenty of scientists that moved us forward greatly in the
Oh
scientific
yeah.
realm that were in effect theists. So how would that be evidence that religion causes more harm than good? And isn't it just, I mean, I don't know how you'd quantify that in a study. I don't know that you could call that empirical evidence other than just anecdote.
Well. So first of all, and what's his name? Lemaitre, who actually schooled Einstein on the Big Bang. He was a Catholic priest. But he's an interesting example, and so are all of those, because first of all, now Newton, for example, stopped his investigations into the motion of planets because he felt that it was actually done by God and there was no point to continue. Now, it's interesting to know how far he might have gotten if he hadn't allowed that religious blockage to keep him from going further. LeMaitre is interesting, and all of them are
But
interesting actually because
how is what you're saying though any more than just conjecture? Like, you know, the storm like destroyed the city because the because of our debauchery. Like I the postulating how far we might have gone if religion didn't exist doesn't seem like evidence or even a path towards evidence for this very tangible claim that you're making that religion does more harm than good.
Well, let me get to that in a second because I want to answer the counter that you had provided, because in every one of those cases, well, at least what it sounded to me like you were suggesting was, okay, here are these religious people who had accomplished all these things, and none of them did it because they were religious. So the religion at least was not an asset to them in that case. So the question is,
Well, if they were in the situation with the woman, I mean, it might have been. You don't know. I mean, Isaac Newton
yeah,
said his greatest accomplishment was dying a virgin. Maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. But all I'm saying is this isn't evidence for the claim that you're making. I'm curious where the evidence comes from the claim that you're making that the world would be a better place without religion, because the way that I look at it, evolution acts as kind of a tally sheet of whether or not things are aid in our survival and reproduction. And by all accounts, the fact that religion is so widespread, it's a behavior that's been with us forever throughout the archaeological record. That would imply that it's more good than harm, at least evolutionarily.
well, I think it would have. You watch though, as we seem to succeed more and accomplish more. Now, I often get countered with this with the Bible that people used to live for thousands of years. But the truth of the matter seems to me to be that the more secular we become, the more we embrace science and that kind of learning, the longer we live. And when you take a look at, for example, religious objections to the polio vaccine, when it first came out, it was thought to be the work of the devil. And people who have open heart surgery was also thought to be a counter to God. You're not allowed to tamper with the heart. When most of our scientific advances, which lead to longer lives, living happier, healthier lives, a lot of them have been opposed on religious grounds by the religious. And if you take a look, we have accomplished more in the last 350 years since the advent of the scientific method than faith did in the 10,000 before that. And the scientific method, and Bruno, who was burned alive for saying that our star, the sun, was not actually by itself and a unique thing, but just a star like any other. And when I have to believe that burning people who investigated the world and tried to improve our understanding, which demonstrably has made our lives better, burning them alive has a chilling effect. and makes people less likely to investigate, which I think, in fact, was in part the point. And I think that the constant campaign by certainly Islam after they banned mathematics. Islam was actually pro-science until they banned mathematics. But the constant campaign, in particular by Christianity, against any kind of learning that would question their understanding of the Bible, that had a significantly detrimental effect. And as the religion loses power, as secular governments take charge, that effect is diminished, and we have seen significantly greater returns in our success and ability to master nature, overcome disease, so on and so forth. Now, that doesn't mean that religion does not necessarily have many advantages personally to people, and I think that's great. But again, my objection is when they start doing what has been done for the vast majority of human history, using that religion to dictate how and why we do things.
Aren't you kind of postulating here that science and religion are always in conflict? Well, not. I don't necessarily believe that's the case, and you still haven't really given me you have a belief that religion does more harm than good. And it seems to be because in the past it has halted scientific development. But I don't know how you would falsify that claim.
Well, first of all,
is it still halting scientific developments?
It is, first of all,
I mean,
halting isn't true, impeding. So I would say, and in some cases, if any scientific developments were made that suggested that the Bible was correct, in fact, they were all for it. It was only scientific developments which, in one way or another, seemed to contradict their interpretation of the Bible, and it would end up taking quite a while.
No, I'm familiar with the argument. I just don't know the evidence. Like, aside from just like tallying up these problems in history versus the tangible good that religion has done. You kind of have a situation here where the good is very small events in personal people's lives tallied against, the church halting Galileo's work. You see what I'm saying?
I do, but I think for the most part I tend to agree. I mean, again, I am not against the personal beliefs of when I go to if I'm in a church and I'm asked to pray, I sit down and pray with everybody else because I want to be respectful of their beliefs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't oppose individual beliefs in any way. It's when they start letting a book written 2,000 years ago dictate the science, and they do still oppose a great deal of where I get concerned when a U.S. senator stands before Congress and says, we don't need to deal with global warming because God will protect us. I find that wholly unacceptable. A U.S. senator should not be doing that. And I think that has to be opposed. When they start to argue, and I mean, this is, as an American, my perspective on this is somewhat different because in America we have some difficulties with this that doesn't seem to exist very much in other countries. But we have people trying to rewrite our textbooks to forcibly include creationism in science class, and I make incredible attempts to do so. That, in my mind, is a significant negative. Now, to sit here and say that this means that religion doesn't have positives would, in my mind, be ludicrous. But that also doesn't mean that I can't oppose when the religious, and again, you can have a scientist who is also, and LeMaitre is, again, the perfect example because the Pope offered to canonize his work on the Big Bang, which, again, he schooled Einstein. Einstein didn't believe it. LeMaitre was right. But when the Pope offered to canonize it, he said, no, this is something very different than religion and what I do as a priest, and this should not be part of the canon of the church. And when you have something like that, I would fully support, and one of my best friends is Greek Orthodox. And one of the reasons that works is because we can have very respectful engagement with each other. And It's really only the people who sit there and say, well, we should be burning homosexuals, or, we can't allow homosexuals the same rights as other people. And I think when, and take a look at the Catholic abuse scandal. It's only a belief in God that could allow people to say, we are men of the cloth, but we are going to protect other Catholics who have engaged in child rape. I get really upset when I say abuse. It's rape. They have engaged in the rape of children, but because they believe the organization of the church is more important, and because they believe they're doing God's work in that end, they are literally willing to agree to stonewall any secular efforts to deal with that. And
this problem, anti-theists bring this problem up a lot, but this problem has also happened in school districts. Like, school districts want to protect their institution in the same way the Catholic Church wants to protect their institution. So you're saying the solution to the Catholic abuse problem, which I think is abhorrent and something needs to be done about, you're saying the solution is just to get rid of the institution of religion. Well, I would counter to you, is that your same solution to, like, the Department of Education? Like, do we get rid of the entire schooling system because there's that problem exists in there as well?
I think that's an excellent point. And you get tribalism everywhere. You get tribalism with atheism and anti-theism, where they're willing to sort of ignore their own problems.
But corruption inside the institution, that's going to exist in any institution.
There is some truth to that. I think, however, just because it exists in every institution doesn't mean there aren't some institutions which are more predisposed to it. And again, my answer isn't to get rid of religion. It's to get rid of the notion that the religious somehow are privileged in the creation of society and social rules, again, against homosexuality or anything like that, or B, privileged against those rules. So even in the example that you gave of corruption inside a school system, while they understand at a minimum that what they're doing is probably illegal and that they can suffer consequences from it. In the Catholic Church, for the most part, they are rendered almost completely immune to any sort of consequence, and until recently have been immune to criticism.
If it's not wrong, if they don't know that it's wrong, why are they hiding it? Like, if you're making the argument that it's acceptable in the Catholic Church, then why are they hiding it?
Oh, I'm not saying what's acceptable is the hiding of it. They're okay with the hiding of it, especially from secular authorities.
I'm sure that rank and file Catholics are not okay with the hiding of it. Like,
I'm sure of that too. I completely concur.
Like, obviously, the people who have the most to lose are going to be the most predisposed to hiding it. I think that goes with the school system analogy as well. So my question to you is, what are you doing as an anti-theist? Like, if you're saying I don't have a problem with religion, then why are you an anti-theist?
I have a problem specifically with, and this, again, with the church and what they're doing. I would have no problem with there being a Catholic Church. I'm not trying to get rid of it. What I am trying to get rid of is this notion that they have been empowered, either by the Bible or by God or whatever, to establish their own rules and to establish rules for other people, to which they are not beholden either by secular authorities or. And again, the ban on homosexuality is, I think, a very good example. I think there are plenty of other examples where they say, listen, we are going to exercise commandments issued by God 2,000 years ago and tell other people how to live. I don't mind how they live. I just don't think that they have a right to either A, be above the law, or B, enforce their laws.
Do you think they are above the law, though? Because I don't see the Catholic Church as being above the law.
I think they are very much above the law. I think I live in Boston. I knew Bernard Law. I knew Cardinal.
So are you saying that the authorities would not step in if they knew these abuse scandals were going on? That's your claim.
No, my claim is that they believe that they believe themselves above the law. So they have actually said that, and I forget the name of the document.
Why are they hiding it then? If they are above the law, why are they hiding it?
Because they know that they can still suffer the consequences. They
Then they
believe
aren't
that
above the law. Then they aren't
well,
above the law.
Well, here's the thing. First of all, when it's the church, it's been my experience that the police tend to be a lot slower to act.
Right.
They tend to say, okay, well, it's the church. We're not going to necessarily, and there's a stigma against, in fact, there's a stigma against anti-theism, but there's a stigma against engaging the church unless you have even more evidence than maybe necessarily. And then what they have a tendency to do, like with Bernard Law, he was really treated with kid gloves because he was a cardinal. And he wasn't treated like a criminal until he fled ahead of a warrant and went to the Vatican. And again, what the document, I can look it up. I forget what the name of it is.
No, I don't think either side is going to condone this kind of behavior. So I would call it corruption. You're saying that this institution is more predisposed than corruption than other institutions, which I don't believe. There's a separate issue, though, going between institutional power, which you obviously have a problem with, and the family unit using religion as needed as a kind of therapeutic way of dealing with life. Like I want to go back to my original question about the woman whose son was brutally murdered.
Yeah.
Like, what solution do we have for her? I really think that this is how religion sustains itself and will continue to sustain itself. And my question is, a lot of people talk about that we don't need religion. Like the original debate question was, do we need religion? You've said that there's no evidence that the species needs religion. I'm curious how you're defining need. And it seems to me that the woman in that scenario very much had a need for it, and in kind of even like a way to deal with pain management, as you might after having a surgery or something like that, some traumatic experience. Like, what is the alternative to that through some kind of secular institution?
At present, none.
But
that I can
even
think of.
Like, let's use our imaginations here. Like, what would be something like that?
All right, so let's one thing at a time. I'll start with need. So to start with, what is a need? There are, and I printed out a few, but I don't have. I'm not right at my computer right now. A need would be something that really is essential for one reason or another. Food, air, water, shelter, these are needs. We also have psychological needs. We have a need for love. We have a need for acceptance. It's an absolute need. It's as important as any of the other needs. We have a need for emotional security and stability. That's an interesting one because it's very tough in a world that Hobbes had described as nasty, cold, brutish, and short. It's very tough to see that need filled, and we are starting to see it filled far more than it's ever been. But it's a need. That woman had a need that had to be filled. I think that, again, if you grow up in a secular society where you don't necessarily think, so for me, losing my religion was extraordinarily difficult. I was very used to the idea that I was actually in some way immortal. That I would die and I would go on heaven or hell or purgatory, who knows, but I'd get to see my kids again. I'd get to see my wife. And I had all these things that was really strongly ingrained in me. And once all that started to come apart, and it took 10 years, I didn't just overnight become an atheist or even an anti-theist. That was excruciatingly difficult. And that's a huge fall. And when Neil deGrasse Tyson talks about people who go to his show at the planetarium and they see that and they come out depressed because they see how small the planet Earth is in the universe, and all of a sudden we seem so insignificant. And one of the things he said is, well, if that makes you feel deflated, maybe your ego was too large going in. And I think one problem is that religion does seem to set up these expectations that We are much more than our animalistic selves. And then once you live within those expectations, you kind of have to work with it. I think it gets, which is another reason why I wouldn't do a Thanos snap and just get rid of religion. I think people who grow up in secular countries manage to be able to cope with those kinds of losses because they don't have expectations that are unreasonable that might have been set up by religion. But if you are already in a more religious society, I think you're going to be relying, you still have that need of having some kind of security and comfort, and that has to be filled. Religion does do that. And again, I'm not against it doing that in the cases where it's needed. My objection is to where people use these what I believe to be mythical commandments and injunctions and start trying to put those on society. And I think the less that happens, the more we thrive as a species. And but I have absolutely no, if that's, and like I said, I, as long as they're aware that I'm an atheist, I will pray with people. I have no objection. And whenever somebody says they're praying for me, I'm thrilled. I don't think it's going to do anything, but to me, that's a compliment. That's a real compliment. That means someone cares enough about you that, except when they're doing it just to be like, I'm going to pray for you. Okay. But, I think there has to be a lot of live and let live and acknowledging that this is important. And I miss my belief. I do. It will never come back. And I miss it. And I would never take it away from someone simply for the sake of taking it away or because I don't believe it. What concerns me is when they allow that to influence how we function and force others to live by it by some means.
Do you believe how a person feels is as important as how they think?
Do I believe that how a person feels is as how? Could you give me some concrete examples?
Well, it seems like you're concerned with the type of thinking that religion gives people, which is a higher cognitive function. Our feelings would be more equated with like the lizard brain. I feel good today.
Yeah,
I
okay.
feel happy. I feel, satisfied. Those things are not rational things.
That makes a lot of sense. No, I don't think one is necessarily more important than the other. I think we all have to, an artist, a very good artist, we take a look at their work and we have these feelings evoked because that's what they've been in touch with. They've managed to even sometimes suppress, the thinking, and they've come out with the feeling. And we are made of both, and both are important.
So to get back to the original debate, you
Yes.
You had done the debate with SJ, and we had talked privately. You had said, and this is kind of my steel man of your argument. You had said that in order to claim we need religion, you need to find something we as a species need that cannot be found in any other source.
Yep.
Whereas nothing meets both of those requirements, we do not need religion. But that last part is not true, because you've said that we as a species need psychological health. You said that's what religion serves, psychological health. And you also you've also said that we cannot find that in another source. You said no, it can't be found elsewhere by secular means. You said it several times. I've asked you to postulate where we could possibly find it, and maybe we can at some future date. But at this point in time, people need psychological health, and that cannot be found in another source. So by that criteria, by your own criteria, we do need religion.
I think that's reasonably close. I would argue a couple of fine points. First of all, I think there are probably individuals who are going to need it. That doesn't mean we as a species need it.
So some people are more important than others, or some people are. I mean, why would some? I mean, I'm assuming everybody needs psychological health. You're saying some people don't need religion for psychological health.
Well, again, and this is why I brought up the secular societies, because
Hmm.
I think what happens is what the studies have shown, and SJ had brought up a lot of studies that showed that um, religion in one way or another was helpful to people. But all of those studies found that it wasn't the religion, it was the social interaction. And a number of those studies found that, in fact, you could, if you did other kinds of volunteering, if you did other kinds of work for other people, if you were of service to the community in some way, it didn't matter whether it was religious or not, that's what provided the benefit. And what I think you'll find is in secular societies, they may not have any one thing that does it, but they have still built up a society that is healthy and cares for each other and works with each other. But because they don't have these metaphysical expectations, people are able to thrive and be happy. That the countries with the highest happiness index and that are the healthiest, 8 of them are also the most secular. So the notion that we would need religion to fill a psychological gap that can't be filled another way seems to me to be undermined by the fact that there are countries that are successfully doing it. Now, yes, they are successful, and that's part of how and why they do it. So I'm not necessarily saying that the lack of religion has made them successful, but it goes, I think, to the point that, hey, without religion, you can't be happy. There are countries where they succeed in that just fine. I think it's harder for people who grew up with certain metaphysical expectations. So there are individuals for whom, yes, they're going to still need religion individually. I don't think that that means we as a species need it. I think we can operate just fine without it, but we do use it, and it certainly does have utility. And for some people, it's got more utility than others. And that's not a judgment, by the way. I'm not trying to say that they're worse people or that people who don't do it are better people. What I am trying to say is that there are going to be people who need it. And I've got no gripe with that. If they do, they do. And if they want me to sit and kneel and pray with them, I'm willing to, as long as they know I'm an atheist, because I personally would maybe find that offensive having a atheist do it with me, because I would think that would diminish my beliefs. But if that's what they want, and if I'm in their house and it makes them feel, that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to support it.
So I just want to get some of the numbers straight here, because I'm sticking on this point. You're saying we as a species need it, and some people will need it, and some people
we
won't.
do not. I'm sorry. No, I said that we as a species do not need it. We do not need. I believe
Right.
we as a species do not need religion.
Right, right. But I'm going to, you're saying some people need it, some people don't. And we as an overall species don't need it. Now, if there are billions of Christians and billions of Muslims and billions of Buddhists and Hindu, let's just focus
Yep.
on the monotheistic religions, because I think they're most obvious for the point that I want to make. If
Yeah.
you're saying that those people need it, but we don't need them as a species, like you're talking about cutting the population of the earth down to a minuscule amount. If you're just saying that the people who need it, who don't need it, rather the atheists, those are the only people that matter for the species. Do you see how that's a little? You're talking
No,
you're talking
no,
about the egomaniacs on the religious side. That's like that
no,
seems a
I
little.
see what, but that's not the argument, and here's why. They don't need it because they're different. They don't
Mhm.
need it because they were born needing it. They don't need it because of a psychological deficit. They need it, in my opinion, because they grew up with it, because it's part of their culture and who they are.
But they need a culture, right?
Yep.
Why aren't atheist cultures? Why are atheist cultures so unsuccessful then?
Are they unsuccessful?
Well, you've made an argument here that wealth that secular societies are the most prosperous. Now, I think you get the causal relationship backwards. I think prosperity leads to more secular societies. But I think that prosperity is often built on religious structures and institutions. Pro-social environments create a great place to foster businesses and economic growth. Now, once that economic growth takes hold and people become more secular, then the anti-theists rush in and want to blame it all on religion. But I don't think that's an accurate assessment of the situation.
But wait a minute then. So why do they become more secular?
They become more secular because religion provides a existential security, the psychological need that we both agree people crave, right?
Yeah.
If you have wealth, if you know that, like, if you're in a place where the woman whose son was murdered is happening, 3 times a week, you're obviously people are going to need religion more. If you're in a place where that situation is rare, then people don't need religion as much. So the
But then
more,
haven't you just granted my point though? Because then what you're saying is that once you have a stable society, it's true. You don't need religion. That's what they're showing. That's what again, I'm not trying to say a causal relationship. What I'm saying is
well, there,
once these societies have established that kind of security, all of a sudden you don't need religion. So the people, when I say they need religion right now, it's because they're not living in those places. But I'm not trying to suggest that we cut them off, that they're different, that it's just that because of their circumstances. But we as a species don't need it. If we can find alternatives, which clearly exist because we can see it successful in Scandinavian countries. We know that secular societies can do this because religion falls away. So when you ask me, well, gee, Nick, what does secularism provide? It's a whole host of things. It's no one thing, but the fact that it's worked in these countries suggests to me that it does in fact provide it. And if we could get the entire world that successful and that happy, my suspicion is most religion, probably not all, but most religion would just fall away, which then suggests to me we don't actually need it. We use it because it's useful in the absence of other kinds of security, which is really what we should be focusing on.
well, we don't know what happens when those nations fall on hard times. My
Oh, that's true.
My thinking is that the religiosity rushes right back in. And I also want to say that
that's probably true.
I also want to say, for the simplicity of this debate, I've only focused on the sorrow, death, and emotional management, the first argument that Asma makes in his book. He also makes 5 other arguments about mitigating emotions like fear and rage, the ecstasy, joy, play impulse, the mental training, the forgiveness restart button, which I'm not really touching on. So,
all right, just one real quick thing, just FYI, I've only got about another 5 minutes. I just want to
that's fine. That's fine. We've so you were very clear in our discussions about this. In order to claim we need religion, you need to find something we as a species need.
That religion that cannot be filled by any other means than religion. But here's the thing, again, it's clearly being filled by other things in these societies where it works. And I agree, religion may sneak back in if if hard times start to head in. But
I looked at some of these secular nations, and I think the anti-theists are making them out to be far more secular than they already are. I think one of the Scandinavian nations is 70% Lutheran. Now, I know the anti-theists will argue that they're just passively Lutheran and it's just some kind of cultural adaptation. They're not really religious. But those people in effect have an insurance policy. They know that those institutions are there when and if they do need them, if they are in the situation where the woman is, where someone is brutally murdered and the sorrow is debilitating. Those institutions can step in. Now, those situations may be rare because of the wealth aspect of it, but I would argue that they still have this insurance policy going, and I would argue that insurance policy is in fact necessary and will always be necessary because we don't know the future. We don't know when we may fall on hard times, when that inherited wisdom may be very necessary.
Out of curiosity, do you think that all atheists go without that insurance policy, or do you think that secretly they are either theists or they believe somehow or something like
that? I'm not sure I completely understand the question. I think that, like, if something happened to my wife, I would be awestruck. Like, the idea that I could be reunited with her one day, it would just, the appeal seems quite obvious to me. So I don't.
Well, and I've said it appeals to me too, and I lament the loss. But we both appear to survive without it, and
I don't know that I would survive without it, to be honest with you. Like, I think
become more religious.
No, I think I might commit suicide. I think a religious.
Okay.
I think a religious person might soldier through. I think I might take my own life.
I have to tell you, I do see that objection, but I'm also coming at it from a point of a theist sorry, an atheist who was originally a theist. It seems to me that people who were born in, and there's what's the name of that culture they found that actually has no God concept? Um, I've forgotten the name. Athos. I forget. At any rate, I think there is a difference for people who uh, developed unreasonably high expectations of metaphysics based on a culture where there was an assumption of a god, that we are a higher species just than our animal
Well,
selves.
I don't necessarily understand what that has to do with the problem you pose.
Well, no,
I mean,
I think you've got a fair point.
this is a useful adaptation. Seriously, if the difference between a atheist and a believer is one soldiers on and one offs themselves, it seems pretty obvious why atheism doesn't have much of a. I mean, the anti-theist will say that religion is waning and that we're more secular than we ever have been. But when you talk to these people who don't believe in God, they believe in ghosts. They believe in all kinds of they haven't abandoned magical thinking
Well,
one bit.
some do. No, I think that's a fair point, but a number that I've met don't. At least to the best of my knowledge, I can't testify as to what I know for certain in their minds, but a number of people I've met from far
Why do you think religion exists? If it wasn't
because it's
some
been
kind,
useful.
yeah, it's an evolutionary adaptation, right?
An evolutionary adaptation. I think I'm not well versed enough in it to say that that's the case, but it sounds reasonable to me.
Okay. Do you have any closing thoughts before we go?
I appreciate you having me on. I enjoyed the discussion. I hope you did too. And no, I think that's about it for me. You do need to get going. I apologize. I got to cut this short.
Yeah, we'll go ahead and leave it there. Obviously, if you have any thoughts for either Nick or myself, leave them in the comments below. I'm interested in your thoughts on this topic. I'm also interested in what the potential secular replacement is for that question, because it's the one that gets me every single time. Because I don't have a good answer for that. I honestly don't. So leave us your thoughts in the comments below. I'll go ahead and end it there. You can stay on the line, Nick, and I'll say a quick goodbye.